Autumn in Berlin always carried a certain chill. I liked this season. I wandered through the flea market, sifting through stacks of vintage cameras, negatives, and abandoned photo albums. There was something about them that fascinated me. Each picture was a forgotten fragment of time, a story left untold. Sometimes, they even felt more real than reality itself. That's where I found the album. It sat on an unremarkable stall, thick and heavy, its leather cover worn and frayed from years of handling. When I flipped it open, the first thing that greeted me was a series of black and white photographs. They belonged to a single family, likely from the 1950s. The men wore neatly pressed suits, the women adorned with delicate hats, the children in plaid skirts or shorts, playing in a park. The backgrounds were unmistakably Berlin, aged buildings, familiar streets, echoes of a city frozen in time. At first, it was just nostalgia. Then, I noticed her. In every single photograph, tucked into the far corner, stood a girl. She was out of place. Her presence felt wrong, as though she had been inserted into the scene rather than belonging to it. She wore a simple white dress, her long black hair falling neatly over her shoulders, hands gently clasped in front of her. She never interacted with anyone. Never smiled. Never moved. She only stared right at the camera, as if she could see through the lens, through time itself. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence. But as I turned more pages, unease tightened around my chest. Birthday parties, family outings, winter strolls, she was always there. Always in the same pose, in the same spot, watching. And then, the pictures began to change. She started moving closer. Not suddenly, just a step forward, at first. Then another. Her face became blurrier with each step, as though the camera struggled to focus on her, but her gaze remained piercing, unrelenting. I turned another page. And froze. The last photograph wasn't from the 1950s. It was my bedroom. The angle was perfect, facing my bed, the sheets, the curtains, the bookshelves. Every detail was precise, identical, exact. And standing beside my bed, just inches from the camera, was her. Her head tilted slightly, as if waiting. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel her looking at me. A cold fist clenched around my heart. Then, a camera shutter. I snapped my head up. The room was still. Silent. My camera lay undisturbed on the desk, its lens dark, its power off. And yet, the sound had been real, so close, like someone had stood right next to me and taken a picture. I scanned the room. Nothing had changed. But the air was wrong. Heavy. Watching. I looked down at the open album, my pulse hammering in my ears. The last photo was still there. The girl, unmoving. I told myself it had to be a trick, some elaborate hoax by the album's previous owner. But logic couldn't shake the truth that clawed at the back of my mind. She wasn't just in the photos. She was looking at me. The entire night, I tried to ignore the album. I left it on my desk, deliberately turning my back to it as I lay down, forcing myself to sleep. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling, that cold, prickling awareness that someone was watching. The apartment was too quiet. Even the usual sounds of the city, passing cars, distant footsteps, seemed muffled, like the world had pulled away, leaving me trapped in a vacuum of silence. Eventually, past midnight, exhaustion took over. And then, a shutter snap. Cold. Mechanical. Right there in the darkness. My eyes flew open, my heart slamming into my ribs. The room was pitch black. Only the dim, amber glow of the street lamp outside filtered through the curtains, casting elongated shadows against the walls. Everything was still. Silent. Except, on my desk, something had changed. A new photograph lay there. My breath hitched. It was a fresh print, its white border crisp, the scent of developing chemicals still faintly clinging to it. With trembling fingers, I picked it up, my skin ice cold, sweat beating at the nape of my neck. The image, my living room. The perspective was from the doorway, capturing the entire space. And standing there, just inside the frame, was her. The girl. She hadn't moved. Her pose was the same. Hands clasped. Head tilted ever so slightly. Staring. But she was closer. My stomach churned. A wave of nausea climbed my throat. I switched on the bedside lamp with a frantic jerk, flooding the room with warm light. Empty. No one was there. But the air was heavy, thick with the faint scent of mildew, like old, forgotten fabric sealed away for decades. I rushed to my camera, yanking it up, flipping through the storage card. Nothing. No new images. No sign that the camera had even been used. I grabbed the album, flipped through every page. The photograph wasn't there. Then, I saw the mirror. A full-length mirror stood beside my wardrobe, its glass reflecting the room perfectly. And someone else. In the corner of the reflection. She was there. Her figure faint. Unfocused. Standing behind me. Head tilted. Watching. I spun around. Nothing. But when I turned back to the mirror, she hadn't moved. Still there. Still watching. My pulse pounded against my skull, my breathing erratic. I clenched the photograph in my hands, my nails pressing into the paper's surface. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what she wanted. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was getting closer. I couldn't sleep anymore. For days, her shadow had haunted me. The girl in the photographs was getting closer. The camera shutter clicked in the dead of night, whispering in the darkness. Her reflection lingered in the mirror, but every time I turned, she wasn't there. This had long since slipped beyond anything rational. Fear had become a constant, creeping presence, sinking into my lungs with every breath. I had to find out where the album came from. I spent hours poring over each photograph, searching for something, anything, that could tell me where it had originated. And then, on the back of one image, I found them, a series of faded numbers. Handwritten. Barely legible. After some research, I matched them to an address in Berlin, a house abandoned decades ago. The house. It stood at the far end of a quiet street. A relic of a forgotten past. The windows were cracked, the wooden door splintered and weathered with time. A damp, suffocating stillness hung in the air, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years. Standing there, hesitation gnawed at me. A part of me wanted to turn back. To forget everything. But something stronger pushed me forward. The door was ajar. When I pushed it open, dust spiraled into the stale air. Sunlight trickled through shattered window panes, bent and distorted, casting fractured shadows across the floor. Every footstep echoed through the empty halls, a sound both mine and not mine. On the walls, remnants of old photographs still clung to the peeling wallpaper. Their figures were blurred, unrecognizable, faces eroded by time, like ghosts fading from existence. I forced myself to breathe and walk toward the basement door. Its rusted hinges groaned beneath my touch. It wasn't locked. The second I opened it, a wave of damp, earthy rot rushed up from below. The scent of wet soil and decay filled my lungs. The wooden stairs trembled under my weight, each creak a whispered warning. The basement. Total darkness. I lifted my phone, its flashlight cutting through the pitch black. My beam landed on a small, dust-covered table in the far corner. An old camera sat atop it. Its lens was coated in a thick layer of dust, untouched for years. Beside it, an aged film negative, yellowed with time. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, my breath shallow. The image slowly came into focus. The girl. This time, her face was clear. Her eyes, wide, bloodshot, filled with something beyond terror. Her mouth, slightly open, a silent, desperate scream. And her hand. She was pointing. Not at the camera. Not at the past. At me. Memories slammed into me, fragments crashing like shattered glass. She had always been there, in the album, in the photos, in the mirror, watching. Moving closer. And all this time, I had thought she was a warning. But now I understood. She wasn't hunting me. She was begging me. I followed her gesture, her outstretched hand, pointing beyond the frame of the photograph. To the corner of the basement, where a single, loose brick jutted from the wall. My pulse roared in my ears. Step by step, I moved toward it, my breath shallow, my skin ice cold. I reached out. I pulled the brick free. Dirt crumbled away, revealing something hidden beneath the foundation. A small wooden box. Faded with time. And carved into its surface. A name. Isabel Weiss. She had been here all along. Buried. Forgotten. Waiting to be found. My fingertips were ice cold. I felt detached from time, as if I had stepped beyond the boundaries of reality itself. The lid was loose. With all my strength, I pried it open, the brittle wood splintering beneath my touch. Dust and decay spilled onto the floor, the scent of age and neglect heavy in the air. Inside, fragments of a forgotten life. A tattered dress. A broken hair ribbon. And beneath it all, bone. Her skull lay at the bottom of the box, hollow sockets staring upward, as if she had been waiting for me all this time. Isabel Weiss. She had been sealed away, left to rot in the dark, forgotten by the world, trapped in the photographs, lingering between shadows, waiting for someone to find her. To end this, I knew what I had to do. Gently, I lifted her remains, wrapping them carefully in cloth. The air shifted. The basement grew colder. Shadows trembled against the walls, flickering, whispering, telling the story of everything that had been lost. I gathered dry wood and straw, stacking them neatly in the center of the room. My hands were steady as I lit the fire. The flames caught instantly, hungry, devouring. Slowly, reverently, I placed Isabel's remains into the fire. The bones cracked softly, the flames licking hungrily at them, reducing them to embers. The room glowed with an eerie light, the shadows stretching and dancing. And then, a whisper. Faint. Gentle. Thank you. The voice faded like mist, vanishing into the rising smoke. The air settled. The shadows stilled. The house fell into absolute silence. It was over. I watched as the fire burned itself out, its final embers consuming the last of the photographs. And with them, the girl in white was gone. Days later, I found myself standing in a quiet cemetery. A bouquet of white roses rested in my hands as I approached Isabel's grave. Her name was faint, worn down by time, as if even the stone itself wished to forget. The wind stirred through the cemetery, carrying the faint scent of flowers. For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. No whispers. No shutter clicks. No shadows in the mirror. She was finally free. And so was I.